Okay. Well, let's go ahead and start, and if anybody comes in, we can catch them up if they need to. And you can stand up and hold your son. I'm Joy Moore, and I'm a master gardener, and I've been growing herbs for probably 25, 30 years now. Started small and gradually added more and more things. Do you grow herbs?
I used to, and now I have just chives and mint.
That happens to a lot of people. Have the rest of you? Well, they are wonderful plants to grow. It's been said that probably no group of plants can bring you more satisfaction in the garden because they're beautiful and useful. You can see now that everything's starting to really color up and we're starting to get some blooms, and the next month or two will be a prime bloom time in the herb garden. But they are beautiful and useful. They attract many butterflies and beneficial insects and pollinators, so they're very important. You can use them, of course. Most people start growing herbs because of using them for flavoring their foods. But they're also very fragrant in the garden and just all around satisfactory plants to grow. They're just nice plants to have around. And easy to grow by and large. So, first of all, let's define what we mean by herbs. The Herb Society of America defines an herb as any plant that you use for healing, for flavoring, for fragrance, or for other domestic uses like dyeing or making soap or perfumes or any of those things. Well, with that definition, that means an herb can be a tree or a shrub or the herbaceous plants, the annuals and perennials and biennials that we think of as herbs. And weeds. And lots of weeds herbs. And also even some fungi and ferns are considered herbs. And people always ask, what's the difference between an herb and a spice? And we usually think of herbs as the leafy part and the spice as things like the seed and the root and the bark, like cinnamon and nutmeg, cloves. But if you use that big definition, that we were talking about, that herbs are any plant, then you see that spices are just a subset of herbs. We usually talk about herbs as being more things that are grown in the temperate climate and spices being grown in the tropics. But it's a real squishy definition because coriander and cilantro are the same plant. If you have the cilantro plant and you use its leaves, you call it cilantro. If you use the seed, it's coriander. So, now most of the culinary herbs that we use, and that's what most people start, so we'll mainly talk about them, although in this basket are many things that are grown for other reasons, and most plants at some time during the history of the world have been, at least the history of man in the world, have been used for medicinal purposes. So many of those things that are considered herbs, like the yarrow here and tansy, so many of those things that we don't eat were used as healing herbs in another time. And if you look at, there's a book that's a field guide to medicinal plants, and it has just almost every native plant you can think of, because Native Americans at some time or other used those for healing. So, so even though they might not be what we normally think of as herbs. They are herbs because they were at one time used for healing. But we'll concentrate mostly on culinary herbs because that's what most people start with. Now, most of the culinary herbs originally grew wild in the Mediterranean area. And you know, that's an area with hot sun, sandy soils, nice breezes. Well, we've got the breeze today, and we've got the sun actually, but we don't have the sandy soil. And we don't have the hot sun like the Mediterranean does. But fortunately, with some care, we can pretty much grow herbs here without any trouble. There are basically two things that herbs need, and that's full sun and well-drained soil. Thinking about where they came from. And so if you give that plant the right location, it's going to do well. Now, when I say full sun, I mean 6 hours or more of sun. It's the sun that makes the plant develop the essential oils that give it the strong flavor and fragrances. So you want the sun. If you only have 4 to 6 hours, you can still grow herbs. They won't have quite as good a flavor. There are a few that will grow in less than 4 hours, but most don't do well. So try to get at least 6 hours of sun. Probably the most critical thing and the reason most people fail with herbs is because their soil is not well drained enough. And actually, and not just herbs, but most plants need well-drained soil. Very few plants do well with soil that's not well-drained. Of course, for us here, that's something of a problem because we have so much clay. And the clay means that the clay particles are very small if you looked at them through a microscope, and they stick close together. What you want to do is to add something to that soil to make those particles be further apart. Now, you really don't want to add just sand, although you could add a little sand. If you added just sand and clay, you'd get something more like concrete. So the best thing you can do to improve your clay soil is to add compost, because it's irregular sized pieces, regular sized particles. Plus, compost just has all these other wonderful qualities. It helps with drainage, and it helps to give some fertility to your soil. It also helps with disease fighting, helps to combat some root diseases. So it's just a wonderful thing all around to add to your soil. And if you don't have a compost pile, that's probably the best thing you could do for your garden is to have a compost pile and use it with your plants. But even if you add compost, or if you don't have enough compost and you still want to grow herbs, you can still grow them in raised beds. I think there was a program on raised beds this morning here. Or you can grow them in containers. If you're growing them in containers, and what did I one moment here while I get my other props. If you're growing them in containers, you want to not just dig up dirt out of your yard. You want to use a soilless mix. This has peat and perlite in it. That's the one I like. It's Fafford 3S, or there's 3B. And they have that at Mize. You can buy it in a big bag and use it for all your potting. But it drains so much better. If you just put soil, regular garden soil, it's not going to drain very well. This drains well. So if you're going to use new pots, use a soilless mix like that with some perlite in it. So you've got your sun and your well-drained soil, and you're thinking about where to put them. Well, for culinary herbs, put them as close to your kitchen as you can find that sunny, well-drained spot. And that means for some people, they go ahead and put them in pots on their deck to keep them close to the kitchen, even if they have plenty of room in the yard. But if they are close to your door, and you are, and rub it. when I give you an herb, if you kind of crush it, it releases those essential oils. But if you go by that every day, aren't you going to be a whole lot more likely to be inspired to cook with it than if it's way the whiz across the yard? So having them near your door so that when the pot is on, they're right there close is a wonderful thing to do. You can choose to grow them in a separate bed, and some people do that. I'm sure you've all seen pictures of those elaborate knot gardens, really gorgeous herb gardens. Well, most of us don't have the time to do that, although that would be very nice. And a lot of us don't have flat land to do it in, to make a nice flat herb garden. But you can put them anywhere. You can put them in a separate herb garden. You can just mix them in with your flowers, or you can grow them with your vegetables. I do some of both. I grow dill and cilantro with my vegetables because they tend to seed around, and then I grow a lot of the others along with just the flowers, the perennials, and they are beautiful plants. This is this is just greening up, but this is lemon thyme. And there's several times that make wonderful, wonderful ground covers. And I've been on garden tours with Southern Appalachian Plant Society, and that's another plug I'll make. I would encourage you. This is a wonderful gardening organization in the Tri-Cities in Northeast Tennessee, and we can go on tours of people's gardens. We have monthly meetings, so if you're interested and want to take a membership form. But on one of the garden tours, we saw this house, this beautiful house in Johnson City. They had so much time in the beds just because it's beautiful. They weren't going to cook with all that time. They were just using it strictly as a ground cover. And people use things like the chives as edging. They're just beautiful, beautiful plants. This is well, they said it's a Spanish lavender, and I'm going to just keep that in the pot all summer, just as a pretty pot plant. So they're just pretty, as well as as using them for food. So you can use them wherever you want in the garden, even if you're going to cook with them. So that shouldn't be a constraint. When should you plant, and how should? Well, let's back up before we start to plant. Let's talk about choosing what we're going to, what you want to plant. Well, I would suggest, and I've sort of said this in a handout, to start with just a few. I would start with no more than 5 or 10 if you're not growing herbs already, just so you can get to know them. And choose ones that you know you like for first, and then add those that you think you might like later. Some people just hate cilantro. There's even an I Hate Cilantro website. It has a chemical in it that some people just really don't like, and then other people just love it. In fact, in the whole world, it's probably the most used by most different cuisines of any herb in the world. But for some people, maybe if they don't grow up with it early, it just has a taste that they don't like at all. So, I wouldn't grow cilantro if I didn't like it at all. So pick ones that you're going to like and you're going to use and you're going to enjoy. And the ones I've included there are on the sheet are some of the ones that you might want to try first. And then people always ask whether they should start with plants or with seeds. And starting off, most things I might start with a plant, because then you know what it looks like. You got the little label you can stick by in the ground so that you can remember what it is and you don't pull it up for a weed. But most people start with some of each. I will usually grow some basil plants from seed. And this is a little tiny basil that's from seed. It's not very, this is one of the red ones. Most of them you'll see are green. This is, I think it's probably red Reuben or one of those. And that one is maybe, 3 or 4 weeks old. And they'll start to grow really fast. Basil is really a hot weather plant. And so you don't want to get it out too early. In fact, I wouldn't put it outside before the middle of May. It does not like to be below 50 degrees. Its flavor suffers, and if it gets below 40, it'll actually turn brown, or black. So you think of it like you do tomatoes. It likes that same sort of temperature. It likes hot weather.
In fact, isn't basil a good companion plant with tomatoes?
That's what people say. I haven't. I usually have some near it.
Work a little bit.
It's really easy to start from seed. But often what I will do is plant some from seed and keep some coming along, so I have young plants throughout the season. But I also may buy a plant or two of some different kinds of basil, because there's lots of different kinds of basils, just for fun. And I also might buy one that's a little bit bigger than that one, so I'll have some maturing a little bit earlier too. And some perennials are really easy to start from seed. Sage is easy to start from seed. Chives are really easy to start from seed. They'll even seed themselves. I'm sorry, the chives aren't. This is sage, but they're real easy to start from seed. But some herbs are harder to start from seed, so you need to start with a plant or find a friend and take a cutting. Rosemary, for example, is hard to start from seed. Lavender you can start from seed, but especially if you want a specific kind of lavender, or if you want a specific cultivar of any of these. And cultivar is a cultivated variety where something's been bred or selected so that you've got certain traits. Like there is a sage there are sages that are purple and sages that are variegated. If you want that cultivar, then you need to start with a plant. This is one of my favorite plants. This is lemon verbena, and it doesn't produce seed dependably. And don't be bashful about rubbing these plants. Any herb lover will stroke their plants. But it's just wonderful. And if you're going to grow that one, you need to start with a plant. Now, lemon verbena is not hardy here. It is actually a perennial, but it's a tender perennial, so you have to bring it inside in the winter. But you can bring it inside and you can really neglect it, because I have. And it's deciduous. It will lose all its leaves and it'll look dead. And I mean, I may remember to water it once or twice a month. I mean, it will look just awful. And then when the weather starts to warm up, you can prune it back and take it outside. And now mine's got little leaves all over. I mean, I've got a big one at home. And isn't that great? That's not on your sheet, but that's one of my favorite herbs. And so I always try to keep one of those. So when you're choosing plants, you know, I might start out with those basic ones, but I always keep one of those too. And then I will get some that are just ornamental, like this one is a Mexican bush sage. This doesn't really make a, you don't really use this one in cooking. I haven't. But it dries like this. You just do that to it and they dry just beautifully.
It's like a straw.
So it's Mexican bush sage. There is a red, there are many, I forget how many I said on the, there are many salvias, and there's sages. And you smell that normal sage like we use in dressing and sausage. But there are lots of other sages. There's one called pineapple sage. The foliage smells like pineapple, and it has red blossoms late in September that the hummingbirds just love. And so that's one I always try to get. And that one I always buy a plant just about every year. But it's worth it.
Do you get your plants from Shy Nursery or Evergreen?
I get most of them from Shy Valley. Or I start some from seed. This one came from Evergreen in Johnson City. But most of the others came from Shy Valley. But you know, like any gardener, I'll pick up different things at different. This is oregano, the oregano, Greek oregano, the best one really for, you know, this is pizza and spaghetti sauce. And if you haven't used fresh herbs, if you will be amazed at the difference in marinara sauce if you're using fresh basil than if you're just using dry. You know, it's just such a different, it's a different product. Because the flavors of fresh herbs are so bright. And it's healthful. You can, oregano is very high in antioxidants. So you could just think of growing fresh herbs as like adding more vitamins, more variety to your whole diet, part of a healthy diet. You know, not taking them in a capsule, like, I mean, you could do that, but as just a part of a healthy diet, you're adding more vitamins to your diet. So, so you can plant things like oregano and sage. Most of the perennial herbs that are on your sheet, you could go ahead and plant now. I would harden them off if they've been in a greenhouse. You'll gradually get them used to the sunlight, but they can go out now. And as I said before, the basil is really the most picky one. I wouldn't get it out till middle of May. And any of the other really tender, you can actually go ahead and plant dill and cilantro now too, and then they're really kind of cool weather and they'll come on up. I should have said that if you want to grow dill and cilantro, grow them where you want them to be, because they don't like being transplanted. If you disturb their root, they'll tend to want to bloom quickly and go to seed. So then you don't get the flowers for very long. So
Last year I found a monarch caterpillar on my dill.
a monarch, I bet it was a swallowtail.
Think so? Because
Mhm.
I looked at it.
Swallowtail, dill and fennel are host plants for black swallowtail butterflies. The monarch host plant is milkweed.
Right, right.
So I bet that's
Well, I've checked it out several places and even had
a misguided monarch.
yes, yes, I think so.
Well, that's unusual. Yeah. Well, maybe he got lost. But that's another reason to grow dill and fennel. If you didn't grow it for anything else, would be to have those. And the caterpillars are great. I love the caterpillars, and they will eat your parsley too. Where'd the parsley go? Here's the parsley. They'll eat your parsley too, and they'll eat it down to the ground sometimes. Those black swallowtail butterflies, and it will come back. But it's I don't mind them eating it. And just plant enough for them. I always plant several plants so that there'll be enough for them. And actually, if you're trying to attract butterflies, and that handout was about butterflies, it's good to plant in a mass. They can see it better if it's in a mass. Well, we've got the parsley. They're basically two kinds of parsley, and people have preferences. Some like one, some like the other. There's a curly parsley. This is a flat leaf Italian parsley. A lot of people think this has a better flavor, but I was doing a program yesterday, and the lady who arranged it said she really liked the curly a lot better. So it's just a matter of taste. But the thing is to use them once you've planted them. As far as just planting them in the ground, once you've prepared your soil, and I would suggest putting compost in. I always suggest putting compost because that helps with the drainage, and adding a little extra compost never hurt anyway, and it gives just enough nutrients to the soil. You don't need to add any kind of fertilizer to the plants in the ground if you have some compost, and you don't really need to do it anyway because herbs actually like not to be fertilized a lot. They don't really like poor soil, but they don't want to be fertilized because that can make them have lush, kind of watery growth, and you want them to be a little bit. You don't want them to grow so fast because the flavors and fragrances are more intense if they don't grow fast. So you don't want them to be great, huge. So you don't want to fertilize them. And compost can give them all that they need. And in fact, that's true of most of your perennials. You can get all that you need. If they're in a pot, though, their roots can't go out and take all this stuff. You can put a little compost in your pot, or you can use a time-release fertilizer like Osmocote, or there's a Peters. You can use something like the liquid fertilizer. But if you're going to use that, you want to do that. You want to always use it no more than half strength, and maybe once a month or twice a month, half strength. But you don't want to use as much as they tell you to use because it's going to be too much for your plants. When you're planting any plant, put it in the ground at the same level that it was growing at in the pot. And let's see, none of my pots today, usually I have one from a nursery that has roots all all root bound. And if you get one like that, just don't be bashful. Just tear the roots apart. You don't want them going round and round and round in the pot. You want to pull them loose. It won't hurt them. They'll grow back. But it will be a healthier plant if you go ahead and pull those apart. Then when you plant them, water them good when you plant them. Then for herbs, they need about an inch of water a week. Usually after the first week around here, you don't need to bother to water them. They're really, once they're established, they're pretty tough and pretty drought tolerant. If they're in a pot, of course, it's a little different because they sometimes they might be on an area where they don't get as much water. So you need to, and they dry out quicker too. So you need to keep an eye. Stick your finger down in and see about an inch and see if it feels wet or not. Rosemary is a kind of finicky one. It absolutely does not like to be wet, but it does not like to dry completely out either. So you got to make sure you have real good drainage. And when you see it's starting to get dry, water it good. Sometimes when you water plants, it's good to water them and then about 30 minutes later water them again real good because I can't think of the word. Well, maybe it's hydrophobic. Peat moss doesn't take up water real fast. And so you kind of need to wet it and then let it sit and wet it again. And water them good when you wet them. Don't just, or this is true of any plant, give it a good watering and then wait and give it another good watering later on. Don't just dribble on it every day. Don't do that. We talked about fertilizer. Herbs don't have many pests or diseases. So, and really there are no pesticides that are really recommended for herbs. And you don't really want to be eating those anyway. So because they don't need extra fertilizer, and because they don't need, because they don't have any pest diseases, they are an excellent candidate to grow organically. And really should be grown organically. There's just nothing wrong with growing them organic. And if you're even in a pot, you can use something like fish emulsion, or you can use some extra compost in the pot to get the nutrients there, so you don't have to. So you can grow those organically too.
I got a question.
Mm-hmm.
If we put compost from the house on a plant, is it still considered organic as long as I don't put fertilizers on? Is that
compost? Yeah.
Compost doesn't count as, quote, a thing that would not make it organic.
The only thing you have to worry about is if you get your compost like from a municipal source that might have had like herbicides or fertilizers, on the grass, or like if it was treated by Kimlon or somebody who, and then it was raked and put in the trash, then that would not be considered organic. And so then that's really my only concern with using municipal compost, which is some cities are offering now. But if you make your own and you know what's in it, if you know it's just those leaves and grass clippings and vegetable scraps from your yard, that's fine. And in fact, it's great. You missed my compost lecture.
Yeah, I was composting out there.
Compost is the best thing you could do for your garden. Yay, compost. I have, normally when I do a slide presentation, I have this picture of my son's old house. They just moved and it had a lot of leaves. I mean, this leaf pile was something to behold. But it's going to rot, and it's really great stuff underneath, and they don't it's not very sophisticated compost, but actually it's so many leaves it doesn't look bad because it's just a big leaf pile. But it's with a few vegetables and grass clippings thrown in. But it's people haul away their leaves to the landfill, and that's such a shame. It's good stuff. The problem, I guess most people who have problems with herbs, it ends up being due to drainage, and a lot of people will lose them over the winter because of poor drainage. And that's usually the reason why they die over the winter, because they just don't have good enough drainage. Things like rosemary are marginally hardy here. There are 3 or 4 different kinds that are hardier, and I've listed those, I think, on that handout. Hardy Hill, Salem, and Arp are the 3 that you usually hear about, and then they're developing new ones all the time. And if you have a microclimate around your house where you have a more sheltered space, like I have a friend who has a west-facing wall, a brick wall, and her big rosemary is against it, so she's been able to keep it alive and healthy and big. But we're in a real iffy zone, because we can, even though it can be hot here, we can have some cold, real cold snaps and things that go from hot to cold real fast, like lately. So that can be hard on things like rosemary. I have several outside. They aren't gorgeous like some of my friends who have that perfect climate, microclimate, but they're alive. And then I usually have a plant or 2 that I bring inside. And it turns out I have a window in the basement where that gets better sun than some of the things upstairs. And they don't dry out down there. And so that's what I've been doing the last few years, is keeping some things over there. And I'll bring something like this, the tender perennials that aren't hardy, in and keep them in that window. And my old my big old lemon verbena, although it doesn't even really have to have the sun, I don't think. So let's see what I've forgotten. Usually people want to have a neat garden, so they think about mulching their plants. And this is true of any plants that you mulch. If you're going to mulch your herbs, you want to make sure that you don't get up too close to the crown. Stay 2 or 3 inches away from the crown. Do this for all your perennials and even your trees and shrubs, because if you get it up too close, you can get some rotting, and it may just rot off at the base. And also you can get little critters coming up that will tend to eat the plant or eat the bark of a tree. So keep that mulch away. For the gray herbs, and by that I mean things like the lavenders especially are picky. This is crushed granite, or you can use pebbles, and that helps reflect the light. But that and any mulch will also help to keep from soil from splashing up on the leaves. So that helps to keep diseases down. As I said, they don't have a lot of pests and diseases, so that just by doing some cultural things like that, you can help protect them. Herbs are wonderful for attracting beneficial insects. and people talk about herbs in companion planting. As far as repelling insects, there's not as much evidence there, and it seems to be very situational as far as whether or not herbs repel insects, but herbs do definitely attract beneficial insects. They've got tiny little flowers that many of the beneficial insects have small mouth parts, so they can't get in. So you think about these tiny little flowers that tiny little insects can get into, and those are some of the little wasps and flies that feed on harmful insects. So by attracting, by planting herbs, you're also attracting beneficial insects to your yard. And pollinators love herbs. They love the thymes and the rosemaries and the sages and the mints. I haven't let you smell any mint. Let's see. I had some in this pot. And this is rosemary blooming here. This is, I think this is spearmint. There are so many kinds of mints. And I'm sure you all know this, but if you're growing mint, you need to contain it somehow. This is dried mint that a friend of mine did for tea. And that's real easy to dry.
Keep in that jar.
Yeah, keep in that jar.
It's so nice. It really is.
What do you suggest on some of these pests like the tent caterpillars? Is there any way?
I knock them down if I can.
As you were saying, there's really no herbs that repel things really, but so there's really nothing that's going to help with a tent caterpillar other than a good baseball bat? Or?
Baseball bat's good. I try not to use pesticides.
We don't. We just get tired of having those.
I know. But if you think about them as food for birds, they're not quite so bad.
I haven't really noticed the birds eating them that much.
I bet they are.
I hope so. I feel better knowing that.
Have you seen Douglas Tallamy's book, Bringing Nature Home?
No.
He's a professor at the University of Delaware, and this is off of herbs, sort of, although some native plants are herbs. His thesis is that we've destroyed so much of the native habitat with development, and so we're endangering a lot of our native animals too. But by planting native plants in our yards and by not using pesticides, that we can help to bring back or conserve what's there too. And he says it's not just like it's not just the caterpillars, but it's the birds that eat the caterpillars and the lizards that eat the caterpillars. The whole ecology.
The monarch butterflies were down 59%.
I heard that.
In Mexico this past year, and part of it is us.
Mm-hmm.
Pesticides and
not enough milkweed.
Yeah, not enough milkweed.
But Dr. Tallamy did a program for SAPS 3 or 4 years ago, and his slides were amazing. And the book is great. It's Bringing Nature Home, and he has. Of course, they've done more work with the Lepidoptera than just about anything, but there are just so many species that so many birds and other, so many species of Lepidoptera, so many moth caterpillars and so many butterfly caterpillars that are part of that whole food chain. So when I see a tent caterpillar, I just think, well, maybe. So I don't try to kill them all, but I do knock them down.
Yeah, but you do have a baseball bat.
Mm-hmm. I do. Some of them I don't kill though. Like we've been, so much of it's just getting out and looking, just getting outside and looking. And I've got passion flower growing in a bed. And let's see, let me try to remember which one that is. I think that's one of the fritillaries that like the passion flower. And the little violets. And violets are actually considered herbs, but the fritillaries, that's a host plant for them. And so it's all tied in, but and most of these herbs we're talking about are not native. So except for the dill and cilantro and fennel and parsley, that have that the swallowtails use as host plants. I don't know that any of the others use them as host plants. They do use them as nectar plants. This is actually mountain mint, which is a native mint that's dried. But there are many, as I said, when you consider that most native plants have been used as medicine, they are considered herbs, and so you get a lot of those that are lists on those lists, and that are very important to beneficial insects and to butterflies and moths and to the whole ecology. And they all, it gets back to they all evolved together. Mm-hmm. And probably those that are more similar, if they're not native, those that are more similar are more likely to be attractive to those. But the butterflies and moths are real picky. So. As far as using your herbs, they really benefit from harvesting, from pruning and harvesting. So don't ever hesitate to go ahead and cut them and use them, because it helps their shape, and they grow back just fine. When you do cut them, when you do harvest, don't just pick it off on the vine like this, or don't just pick it off like this. That's not the way to harvest it. If you're going to harvest it, go ahead and cut them like that, right on top of a leaf node, so that then it'll grow back nice and full, and then you can take it off the leaves.
Can you cut it too far down?
They usually tell you not to take more than a third off.
Starting from the top, third down.
But or a third of the whole plant, But like mint, it wouldn't hurt it. And I have a friend who cuts his thyme way back. And actually, the chives wouldn't hurt either. When you're harvesting something like chives, go ahead and take it down all the way. All the way down here. It'll just look better. If you cut it up here, that'll just sort of turn brown, and it'll keep coming up. You want to smell that? Love chives.
Yeah.
And so many of these, we so often think we have to cook herbs. So many of them you can use raw, like the chives on the baked potato, or raw basil in a mayonnaise, or just lying on a sandwich or in a salad. So many of them you can just use like they are. Now, when if you want to dry them, it's best to harvest them in the late morning, just after the dew's dried, but before it gets quite so hot during the day. So say 11-ish. And if you've not unless for some reason they're dirty, I wouldn't wash them before I dried them. I would just dry them, because you don't want to add water and then dry it. I do have one friend who'll take her hose the night before and spray them before she harvests them the next day. And then you can bring them up and hang them upside down to dry. Or as in the case of sage, usually what I'll do is just take the leaves off and lay them on a towel on a cookie sheet. And they need to be in a warm place that's dry, where you have good air circulation. So those three things: warm, dry, good air circulation, and
What about a
dark.
dehydrator?
Hmm?
What about a dehydrator?
Oh, a dehydrator is fine. I've read things about microwaving herbs. That to me just smelled bad. I mean, I've tried it. I didn't like that. I know people who do it on, like a really low oven maybe, but I've had better success to just air dry, and that's what this was just air dried. This is some tarragon. One friend has a lot of tarragon, and she just air dries it. Some things dry well, some don't. Rosemary dries well. Sage I really like to dry. And if you're drying, leave it whole until you're ready to use it. And after it's dried, then you store it like this. Basil doesn't dry well, and cilantro doesn't dry well. But basil you can chop up and put in an ice cube tray and loosely pack it, and then put some water over it or put some olive oil over it, and then just take it out, and you can use it for just in spaghetti sauce. Some people go ahead and make pesto and freeze it like that and just get it out and use it. You can do a similar thing with the lemon verbena, except for instead of using olive oil, use canola oil or one of the other things that doesn't have so much of a flavor to it. And then you can use it in baking. So that works well.
What do you mean that cilantro doesn't dry well? What do you mean by that?
I just mean it loses a lot of its flavor when you dry it.
Gotcha.
You can, and you can freeze it too, although I never think it tastes as good as fresh. By and large, fresh, I like fresh the best. I actually like dried sage a whole lot, depending on what I'm using it for. But most things, the fresh is just superior. But in the winter, you don't have fresh basil unless you buy it at the grocery store. So I always have these little cubes in my refrigerator. And once they've frozen in the ice cube tray, you just take them out and put them in a plastic bag. So in January, when you can just pull those out, and it's nice.
I don't know if you've mentioned this before. I see your chives have got a bud on top.
Mhm.
Are you supposed to clip that or just leave it? Let it go?
Well, I think they're pretty, so I leave it, and that's going to be a pretty pink flower. In general, you're supposed to harvest your herbs if you're going to be drying them or freezing them before they bloom. They have the best flavor before they bloom. In fact, I think that the flavor of basil changes pretty dramatically once it's bloomed, and so does cilantro's flavor. And cilantro goes to seed so fast. Once the temperature hits 80, it's going to start to flower and go to seed. So you need to keep succession planting. But it's a problem here to have cilantro year round with it going to seed so fast. But I haven't been able to tell that the chives made a lot of difference. And I want some of my herbs to bloom, so I don't worry about it too much. With basil, such a vigorous grower, you can keep cutting it back. In fact, there's one herb writer who has written a book on basil, and she says that they keep cutting back to, like she would start cutting this one pretty soon. She'd let it maybe get a little, and just keep cutting it off to back, and she can get 15 cups of basil out of one plant. I don't try to do that, but they can really be cut back a lot. But I like to have some of the basil blooming because it's a great one for lots of the pollinators, especially. I usually grow this kind called African blue basil that's just a really pretty ornamental basil, and it will be blooming until frost, and you'll have bumblebees there who are desperate. They're not much blooming then. The asters and that basil keep going, and so I love having that. The bees just love it, and actually the African blue basil is not. You could eat it, but it's not got that good a flavor. But there are all kinds of the basils that you might want to use. The purple ones have a similar flavor, but they're real pretty in a vinegar. And
so you keep some of your, say, basil or sage. You keep some of it for the flower aspect, and all the bugs related to that. And then you keep some for the herbal side of it. Keep them in the same area as you were saying?
Yeah, most of the time. I mean, I'll usually have basil in 2 or 3 places because
like basil?
I like basil. and if you move things to different places, you may find that it does better one place than the other. I've moved. There's this saying about gardeners that you're not a real gardener if you haven't moved it 3 times. And although it may not be the same year with the case of basil, it's probably good to move it around. Yeah, some people do that. One couple I met recently said that when they moved to Tennessee, they brought 2 trailers full of plants with them. And a lot of those were house plants, but they brought a lot of plants. Now, if you're cooking with herbs and you're using old recipes in general, you use about 3 times as much of the fresh herbs as you do the dried herbs. So a tablespoon of fresh oregano, if it calls for a teaspoon of dried oregano. So it just, when you think about it, when it dries and the water shrinks out of it, it gets that much smaller. So that's just a rule of thumb. If you're going to be cooking your herbs, you want to crush them or heat them to get them to release the flavor, and it's good to add it just the last 5-10 minutes or so for fresh herbs, because they do, even though all that wonderful smell is coming out, it's probably not in your food. For dried herbs, about 30 minutes. If you're using it in something cold, it's good to refrigerate it for several hours and even overnight. A real simple thing is to use something like chopped chives in cream cheese or in a butter, and I will use like about 3 tablespoons of cream cheese for 8 ounces. 3 tablespoons of chives for 8 ounces of cream cheese. And I will refrigerate that overnight, and actually will keep longer than that, but it just helps It helps get all that flavor. It's much tastier than if you just eat it right away. So do you have any questions? Any other questions? Any herb-related questions?
Well, I was going to say that one year I grew horehound, and I really liked those horehound drops, so I thought it would be fun to make horehound candy.
Mhm.
And I had a recipe, so I just made an infusion and then made the horehound candy. It was really good.
Did it work? I've never
worked.
tried it.
And then another year I made violet syrup and violet jelly, and I must have had a big basket full of violets that I just went around in different yards and in the woods. And
I could do that this year.
Yeah.
I've got violets everywhere.
it was fun. It turned out it's real light purple, very tasty.
I may have to try that. You can. That's another way of preserving herbs is to make a simple syrup just out of sugar and water, and then to put the herbs in and let them steep. And you can make something. You can put something like the lemon verbena in it, and it will infuse. And I did that one time, and then there was a recipe for making. It was really kind of your own ginger ale. So you put lemon verbena, but you also had some ginger, and grated that, and then added sparkling water. So that was neat. But you can make the syrup and then even freeze the syrup.
Right.
I find it just eat it all up because it tastes so good, so it doesn't really preserve it at all.
Well, that's what happened with the ginger stuff.
Yeah.
It just got eaten. And you could make syrups out of some of the more savory herbs like thyme, and then use that like as a for brushing on to pork or a pork roast or something. Herbs will do that for you.
Well, thank you.
Well, thank you all for coming.